This event is sponsored by Miro. Miro is the online whiteboard platform where product teams can work together effectively. If you don't know where to start, it's packed with over 50 templates for product teams. Whether you need a Kanban, mind map, retrospective, product roadmap, or user story map, we've got you covered. Try it for free.
Hi guys, welcome to my session. I'm going to be talking primarily about my experience being a remote product manager. My name is Gary Webb and I'm a senior product manager at Groupon. I'll try and keep as much as I can to the agenda today. And obviously we'll be sort of talking through a variety of different slides and sort of finishing at the end with a summary. The three key points that I'm hoping to get across today is sharing with you some of the pros and cons of working with three different engineering teams in 3 time zones and how to go about doing that and how to manage the bad side of having people spread across the globe. I really want to talk to you as well about some tools and techniques that I use working remotely. Also want to share with you my experience on how to align in a much broader international product team. And we'll sort of I'll also be sharing with you some of my recommended sources of good product information, just some books and some product school links. But before we do that, we'll talk a bit about me. So here I am, and I'm saying hello to everybody who's listening in. Just give you a little bit of personal information about me. So I've split it by personal and business information. So I was born and raised in Essex, which is a county just outside of London. I live in Essex with my fiance, my 18-month-old boy. Whose name is James, who is as much of a handful as a lot of the products that I manage. I enjoy property, serial property renovator, so I managed to do 3 in 10 years. That doesn't sound as much as it actually is to do. Huge fan of football or soccer if you're from around the world. And I really enjoy the buzz of delivering products, being involved in product management, and I'm particularly excited to be involved in product school, doing some guest speaking as well. Bit about the business part of me. So I actually left school when I was 16. I didn't go to college or university, and I ended up going to work for the UK's biggest bank. Decided that the academic side of learning wasn't for me, and I prefer to sort of a more hands-on role in learning within the bank. I started out just in a call centre, and I moved through a variety of different roles, ranging from an operations manager all the way through to business improvement analyst, before landing in what was a sort of very young digital bank in 2009, where I was primarily responsible for integrating third-party software into the bank's software. I left Lloyd's in 2014 and went to join a startup web to print company. They were looking to rival companies like Vistaprint, and there I was responsible for IT and systems, which is actually sort of a small part of what I did entirely, but primarily I was responsible for all of their internal and external facing products, all of their internal infrastructure, and obviously looking at making improvements to the website. So it was very broad, had a very small team. That company was sold in 2016. We made it a great success. We sold it to a much larger company based in Germany. In 2017, I joined Groupon, which is probably the most exciting product role that I've had. So I'm responsible for the localization of the goods products primarily new platform aims at business integration to the platforms, and looking to create a more streamlined approach for vendors to engage with Groupon, upload their inventory, manage their commercial agreements, and be much more in control of their actual deals going live on Groupon. I actually moved team at the beginning of the year and moved and started to create a new data science product, which is aimed at looking at search and demand. So super interesting project, and we were about three months in, and we're looking to deploy a proof of concept. And then unfortunately, like the rest of the world, this project went on hold whilst everybody's handling COVID. So that's a bit about me, a bit about my experience, the companies I've worked at, and a bit about my personal life. So like I said at the beginning, there were sort of three main takeaways that I wanted to sort of give you my experience on, and some things that I think would be useful. So working with 3 engineering teams in 3 time zones is something that is a reality at Groupon for me. So just wanted to add this quote in from one of my favourite product authors. So the further away the team is from you, the more communication challenges of language, culture, time zones, and the more pressure there is. So that's from Marty Kagan, who writes the book Inspired, which I'll sort of allude back to later. So just a quick look. So when I say 3 different time zones, so I've worked with engineering teams in Seattle, in Dublin, and in Bangalore, all at various different points of a product life cycle, all at various different points, and have very sort of key roles and responsibilities. Looking at, you know, the Seattle team would be the initial product, getting it to a minimum level product. The Dublin team were very much responsible for the localization of that product, and obviously the team I worked with probably the closest. And then we had the Bangalore team who would deal with specific work streams, so things like bugs, backlog, house maintenance, and also looking at some things around user experience as well. So all 3 teams would work very closely together, and it was down to sort of myself and the wider product teams to work with these multiple sites. So I want to talk about a little bit again on my experience on the pros and cons. There are many more than these that I've outlined, but these are the ones I really wanted to focus on. So time zones is a huge, obvious issue. There aren't enough hours in a day to commit to managing everybody, so that's something that you have to manage. A lack of real-time collaboration as well. Trying to get 3 teams to coordinate and collaborate together is a huge ask every day. Things can get lost in translation as well. The different cultures, the different countries, the different ways of approaching product. Again, a lot of things can get lost in translation. So again, there's some ways and hints and tips that I've managed to pick up along the way that I can share with you on how to manage these. Obviously the pros, there's always somebody awake. So follow the sun structure. Somebody's always online, no matter if there's an outage, an incident, something urgent crops up. Somebody's always there to manage. And again, like the fact that there are teams around the globe, you know, I've put there that things can get lost in translation, but on the flip side of that, also there's the global context, you know, working with a lot of companies in the US are very US centered because that's what they know and that's what they do. So when it comes to scalability in the international markets, there is that sometimes that extra context that can be shared around the engineering teams. So it's super useful. So we're going to go into some of the cons in a bit more detail. So I really want to share with you some of the things that I do to manage them. It's hard to completely clear all of the cons, but it's about managing them and sort of getting the best out of them. So in terms of managing time zones, you know, one thing I like to do is make sure that my diary is set so that I have committed time for each particular time zone. So for example, I will work specifically with our Bangalore team first thing in the morning, because that's the sort of end of the day for them. The middle of the day I'll split for our Dublin team. So I'll make sure that, again, these guys have the sort of core part of the day, that the team I'm going to be working with the most. And if I need to catch the Seattle team, I work particularly close with another product manager in Seattle as well. So I leave that back end part of my diary free, so that, you know, again, everybody who works with you will become used to the way that you have your diary set up. And I think that that really helps me in terms of who I'm talking to at what parts of the day, and then prioritize sort of the list of work and the tasks that I have to clear on a daily basis. I know at what point I'm going to be able to clear those as well. So super useful. Changing your working pattern. So I've done this a few times, and certainly I work with a product team in Chicago, and I know that a few of the product managers over the course of the last couple of years have also aligned to work with the London hours, to make sure that we, you know, especially when there's a particularly heavy part of a project or development or prototyping, or, you know, it could be at any stage of the life cycle, that you want to be involved in sort of the core 9 hours a day. I think that's super useful. Something that I recommend quite a lot. You know, setting up a handover. You know, we know that the amount of tasks that are created to create products, manage them, you know, the maintenance that goes behind them, the sheer number of tickets and sprints that are created. You know, having 3 engineering teams is a luxury in some sense, because you always have somebody working on your tickets, or, you know, you know what's happening. But I think there's an element of control that the tickets need, which are, if they are being handed or as resources moved around to manage those, that the person who has written them is able to hand them over in a way that doesn't get confused in the stage I talked about. So again, I think that that's a particularly useful approach. And I think the one thing that we started doing on our daily sprints was actually trying to find that sweet spot in the day where we might be able to get all 3 teams, you know, even if it's not once a day, once a week, certainly more than sort of once a month. Sorry about that. So yeah, I certainly find that useful as well. But if you can't get everybody, at least try and, you know, take 2. I appreciate that different companies may have, you know, more, or they may have less engineering teams dotted around. This is just, again, from my experience, I found this particularly useful. So the second point was around the lack of real-time collaboration. So there's a huge number of tools and software in the market for product managers to really allow you to collaborate effectively. I've picked out a couple of my favorites and where I sort of find the most benefit. So Miro is a great tool for brainstorming, for prototyping, for process mapping, for, you know, sketching, and everybody has a clear view on that. I find that really great. I know that there are other tools out there like Sketch for prototyping and for design, but Miro for me works a little better. Google Docs, again, super collaborative. You don't have, you know, you have version control. Everybody has the same view. You can comment, you can tag, you can create tasks. Super useful. So again, I don't think I personally would choose anything else. Confluence, bread and butter of product management, probably the most used tool for me. So again, super useful in terms of project management. Obviously, as product managers, you have the project and the program side of managing the tasks that you're on. So again, super useful to connect it to Jira. And again, has the sort of the tracking, the trackability that you need in terms of who's responsible for what, and the audit trails that exist. Again, a must-have in terms of managing multiple sites, multiple people around the globe. And Slack, again, the one thing that I like to have is to see a complete chat from everybody involved, whether that's all of the engineering teams. I move completely away from email for, updates, communication, getting people on board with what's going on. Everybody should see the same communication, not different forms or forwarded on email from 3 weeks ago. Or, something I've seen sort of in the past, no matter where I've worked. So again, for me, move away from emails. Find the tools that you think will cover off collaboration. These are just my favourite. Another thing that I like to do is I facilitate a lot of large sessions to bring the business teams, the engineers together. And certainly it's very complex when you look at the structures of big global entities. But I think it's something with a bit of forward planning, preparing these bigger sessions, working with EAs and assistants around the world to bring people together. It might be a bit of pain, and there's probably a lot of alterations that need to be made to get everybody together, but I think it's super worth it. And I think that, again, it doesn't eradicate the issue of collaboration entirely, but I think things like that can make a huge difference to delivering products. And then the third con that I think is probably key in terms of managing so many different sites and teams in those sites, things get lost in translations. So for me, we document anything that's there, we write down. We don't leave it at the end of we don't leave the meeting without any notes. We don't leave the meeting without the sort of assignee of responsibility. We broadcast that, again, not to just anybody who was on the call, but anybody else who may have been mentioned, or who should be on the call, or part of the sort of wider group. I think things slip through the net, especially when companies are super large, and this is just kind of a best practice, housekeeping in terms of product management. And the other thing that I like to do as well is, the expectation on the business or whoever's making the change, or the product team versus, engineering team, is to bring everybody together at the beginning, at the start of the process, for any sort of features or functionality or anything that you're trying to achieve in terms of design and the context. In my experience, working with an engineering team and simply handing them over, after 6 months of discovery and design work, some technical specs to go away and build, isn't as useful as them being involved in that discussion up front as well. So again, I think when you're looking at things getting lost in translation, all of the questions and the delay and the uncertainty that could arise are best off being killed off at the front during the discovery. And that's super simple. Some of the best engineers come up with the best product designs. And again, when you're discussing the problems that you're having that you want to actually achieve, these guys are able to contribute there rather than them being told how something would be built. So again, super useful in sort of making sure that nothing gets lost in translation. And again, linking that back to that big session that I mentioned, it might be the pain up front to arrange a big session, but include everybody, up front whilst you're doing the discovery. So some tools and techniques are used. So this is a fairly short slide, but this is just a couple of sort of things that are linked to what we've just talked about then. So 3 top tips for me. So one is all around prototyping. So people always mention, let's make a minimum viable product. What does that look like? It looks like X number of development weeks and this amount of time passing. I think that a lot of certainly user research and user-centric approach to designing products can really be done in this part. A prototype could be created within a certain number of days, and from there you validate a lot of the user stories and the user cases that you've been researching during discovery. So this is important for remote working because, again, what you don't want to do is simply pass off those technical documents to another team to then start working, to then come back to you with a set of demos. You then go back to the business. For me, again, getting that early collaboration in terms of what the problem is or what we're trying to achieve with a feature or functionality is really that sort of cross-functional come together to really come up with the best solution, at which stage the engineer is fully clear on what it is that they're actually going away to build, and the chances that the demo is going to be much more successful with a few tweaks, as opposed to that wasn't what we were asking for, we want to start this project again. Again, something I've seen a lot of in my time. So yeah, that would really go towards mitigating that. I find it super useful. The second point I've put here is around meeting once a year. I've spent a lot of time in Seattle, spent some time in Dublin. I haven't had a chance to visit Bangalore, but certainly I think it would be something, I couldn't recommend highly enough, is to actually meet the team in person, have a social event, build that relationship with the teams that you are that close to every day. I think that team building is critical in product, because if you don't trust or know the person you're working with or understand their ability to deliver on the technical side, it makes it very difficult for you to know as a product manager at what level you're going into or what level you're providing the information to the team as well. And that links into the last point, which is all about relationships. And relationships are really how I've managed to forge, a successful career in product to this day is, those engineering teams actually sitting with them in person, talking through specific complex functionality, explaining the business logic, explaining the rationale behind, or the user stories, or talking through some examples in person, or one-to-one over a Zoom or other teleconferencing facilities is really key to build that relationship, build that trust between you and the engineer. So again, there's that two-way road, that if something's going wrong, or we need to have an honesty moment, that somebody doesn't feel that they can't do that because they don't have the relationship with you. So and I don't just limit that to the engineering team. I would recommend making best friends with anybody in your data teams, within your decision science teams. These are the people who will back you up during difficult times. These are the people who will back up the cases that allow you to go off and do, cool, things you want to build functionality, really help you actually deliver the problems that the businesses are facing. And they're the people who aren't going to block you if they don't start to see results. So these are, relationships are hugely important, and the business teams as well. Like you really want to make sure that your business partners are your best friends every day. So they're my three top tips. So now I just wanted to share with you just again some of my experience aligning with a wider international team. Groupon is particularly complex in its structure, so it's a good example to use whilst explaining this. Um, so here are sort of the areas that I have to consider when I'm working. So you can see, it's all about Um, I'm one of the only product managers who look after this goods platform outside of the US. So I cover all of the European offices. I cover to a degree the Australia and New Zealand offices, but I still work with the guys in California, the guys in Seattle, and the teams in Chicago. So I'm quite spread across the globe in terms of responsibility of who, who I'm working with. So for me, the sort of tips on getting that alignment with the org are kind of these 3 points. And again, this isn't a limited list. This isn't the only three. These aren't the most important. These are three that I've picked out as things that I would consider for international alignment. So to find common goals and common problems. So they say that influencing is really just about finding a common enemy. And I think that goes a long way to really explaining how you manage to get alignment. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a moment. I think having a solid business case sounds super straightforward, but in my experience, I've seen some really overcomplicated business cases, and when you eventually deliver a product is best originally scoped out previously, and this is a problem for a lot of companies. I know that there's different processes, so we've used some experience on that. And then the third part is understanding your users. For me, every country, every culture, every language is different. And that goes for user journeys and the approach to creating a product globally. So again, we're gonna touch on understanding your users and some things that I think are, again, may seem obvious, but not every company follows them. So I just want to call them out here as well. So we're going to touch on finding common goals and problems. So for me, like the first thing I do when I'm looking at localization of a particular, creating that, so all the regions, territories, the countries for, and writing out a list of all of the problems or anything on your roadmap that is going to affect those regions, and really start to try and consolidate to find out if problem or feature or functionality is really available to all regions, or whether it's just one, whether it's 5, 50. It's useful to know what heading. Is this a huge change that affects everybody, or is this a sort of isolated use or just one particular country? So the second point there is being involved in as many product discussions, not just for your regions. So for me, even though I'm not responsible necessarily for all features and functionality for North America, I really want to know what the roadmap is for North America. Is there some functionality that could be, super minor tweaks that you roll out to international? And likewise, if you're North American, you want to be involved in the international discussions as well, and find out, all of the functionality, not just, selfishly for your particular region. And again, link that back to finding, commonalities between the two, and, you really start to combine the benefits if you can find some functionality that goes to a global stage rather than just a territory. So that again links back to my point around being involved in as many means that you have to spread yourself and plan your day really effectively to be able to join the calls at 9 a.m. in Chicago or at 5 p.m. in Seattle, or if it's an Australian team who are making some discussions. So it's all about, planning your day, adjusting your hours, and making sure that you can be involved in as much as you can. Another part, again, sounds super straightforward, but I think companies can improve the way they do this, is looking and interpreting the global data, breaking it down to region or territory level. Again, looking at point 1 on here as well around creating global matrix. This is a sort of, I guess, almost a second point to that, which is break down your problems and break down your data, approach it from a global level, and then see where your outliers exist. Again, I don't think that there should be, there may be some cases where the data doesn't back up making a global change, but it may be that there are a few territories. If I think about some of the changes that we make at Groupon, the way that we approach some of our vendors and our partners based in Italy is slightly different to how we approach partners and our vendors in different parts of Europe. And that's a purely cultural tactic. So again, the data doesn't always suggest that we need to make the change for all regions. We may need to treat one slightly differently. And then it's about how do you create that in a global platform, but doesn't create too much work as well. So it's really something to think about, which is why I've put in here, understanding your users. And again, the last point, and again, this is something I've learned the hard way, that we've tried to do. So we've tried to do the right thing and build some functionality that's specific for a region or a territory. And I think that that's something to really try and avoid, unless there's exceptional circumstances. The core product should satisfy the largest amount of the user journeys. And then I think that certainly the way that, in my experience, how I've worked, is to really approach anything where there's an outlier functionality, is to really introduce some kind of process change or work with the business teams to find a better way of doing things as opposed to implementing a one-off piece of technology. I've been down the rabbit hole of trying to change individual country specifications because we believed it was the right thing to do. But I think overall it really makes a complex product even more complex to manage and maintain in the future. So again, just some advice in my experience. I'm sure there are situations where that can be worked really well, but certainly that would be my advice. So the next point was around having the solid business case. So again, we're gonna talk through this in some detail. Make sure you have the reliable data. So many business cases are built on, senior leadership directing what changes are being made, that sometimes the data can be formed to back that assumption. So I think that as a product manager, you really have to, have the gumption to turn around and, have that honesty moment and say, do we have this actual data? Are we going to back this up with the data? And I think it's about having the sort of authority to then sort of push back where you're needed to say, hang on, this data doesn't exist in this particular format. Let's look at what else is available. And if anything else isn't available, we look at the user store, we start again and see what is available. At the end of the day, the biggest pain point I see sometimes as a product manager in general, aside being a remote product manager is realizing the benefits. And I think that, you know, if I look at, in my experience, some of the, you know, really painful conversations I've had, it's been about the realization of benefits. So for me now, it's looking at, you know, tangible data sources, making best friends with the data teams, wherever they may be, and really sort of making sure that you have that reliable data. Point two was around having a healthy relationship with data analysts and scientists. I probably drive that home more than any other advice. Like I said a few times already, relationships really are the key to delivering product, and especially for somebody who's remote, to have that ability to reach out on a chat, or, you know, WhatsApp or whatever form you need to do with somebody who you trust. It can get you out of, it can really aid you with moving forward. Third part, you know, I'm probably one of the more outspoken product managers, but it's all about, you know, if you believe that the user case or the business case here is really weak, the data doesn't really exist, or the data doesn't tell you what the hypothesis were, it's about speaking out, having that, you know, honesty with, you know, no matter what senior level you know, everybody has a boss, no matter what boss you're dealing with, you know, not proceeding even if you're not sure or it doesn't look like it's going to be a strong case, is to say, actually guys, look, we've got other things here that do have a solid business case, we've got the data adds up, let's proceed with those and not take risks with things that something looks a little weak. Again, I only talk from experience, which is why I'm sharing these with you, because, you know, these are all sort of examples from my career where I've felt that being remote has really, you know, been quite a painful process at times. And then the fourth part here, again, is all about that sort of honesty moment. So with the product sponsor, now whether that's the VP of your department, or whether that's sort of global VP, or whether that's sort of part of your stakeholder list, you know, you have to be honest and say, although you've given us the data, you've given us a business case, the prioritization exercises that we all manage day to day, you have to have the reality that not everything will get built, especially on the scale of in which change takes place today. So I think it's about having those conversations to really, you know, push back where the business cases don't add up, and be realistic about, you know, this change is unlikely to be made this year, or unlikely to be prioritized this quarter, or whatever the process might be. So I'm going to move on to understanding your users. So super important part is to create processes for each region. So understanding how each individual team works. So whether that's Italy, Spain, Germany. Now, you'll probably find that the process is, you know, a core process is 95% similar, and then you might find some odd, unique outliers for each region. And again, it's looking at, do those outliers work for each region, or is that a really unique case? So again, if you understand the user journey, and you understand the data, which we've gone back through as well, you have a much better way of making a decision whether or not something needs to be localized for a specific region, or whether an international business as such is sufficient. Ask for feedback from your users. This is something that, you know, I don't think that companies do enough of, is the usability and the user-centric approach to delivering products, which is building products based on user journeys, as opposed to, this is some cool functionality that we'd like to build. And again, I'm not generalizing every company, but certainly in my experience, I have seen that a large amount. So again, once you've got that prototype, once you've done your design sprint, you create the prototype, you really want to get your users back in to say, do you validate these? Yes or no? And then take their feedback on board as well. If there are tweaks to be made, you can do that at the front end as opposed to spending loads of time on training, marketing at the end of your product journey, only to be told by the users, oh, it looks great, but actually I can't use that because of X, Y, and Z. So it's good to get those at the front, get them included in the scope of the sprints that you plan, as opposed to adding them to the backlog once the product's been delivered. Be prepared to change your strategy to adoption per region. So by this, what I mean is be prepared for some things that you don't know to come out and actually alter how you may approach delivering the sort of core global product. So I think I mentioned before the first point around, you find an obscure or an outlying process on an Italian process map. Actually, everybody else does the same thing, but they do it a manual way. So then you look at a much broader tech change that solves the problem. And that's what I mean by changing your strategy. Another part that I'm a big advocate of is bringing in some champions, subject matter experts from the business teams. So the people who run the processes, the people who deal with complaints from the people who run the processes, the people on the ground who are using the tools every day. These are the people who will validate your concerns. These are the people who will validate the data. And again, the way that I approach it from the discovery perspective are to have these people involved up front in the conversations and help, between the business teams, the engineers and the product team, we all work together to that common goal. And again, subject matter experts, not just necessarily from the business, but business per country. And again, working remotely, I think that's super important. When the core product may be led from North America, I think it's imperative that you have people from different regions expressing how they use the tools and things that they find an issue. Although not all of them could be built, again, it gives us then an opportunity to suggest some process changes as well. So I think it's a healthy exercise to have people involved. So, I've talked a lot about the 3 points, and I really just, again, this is mostly just me sharing my experience. This isn't an extensive list of all of the pros and cons or all of the things you should be doing in product, but certainly from a remote perspective, this is where I find the most value. So I just wanted to sort of bring a summary together of the points that we've gone through, just in a slightly sort of more summarized view. So, looking at managing the time zones, we talked about that a lot in terms of being one of the more messy parts of being a remote product manager. So again, looking at effective time management, really careful planning. It's not as daunting as it first seems. Certainly when I first joined Groupon, and it's the first experience I'd had of having multiple engineering teams across the globe. It was daunting. I didn't know how I was going to, work with all of the different teams and get my point across to all of them. So again, to adapt and all of the careful planning that's involved, I really think you can manage your cons from the list that we discussed around the sort of first few pages. The second point I really wanted to take for you guys to take away is, make your life easy. Don't open yourself up to anything where interpretation is involved. There are loads of software that supports product managers. There are software that you can collaborate between a magnitude of different teams. And there are loads of different processes as well. And I'll touch on some of the books I recommend at the end as well. Because I think that a combination of a really structured product process with the right software is really all of the hints and tips you need in order to be a remote product PM and a successful product PM as well. And the final part is all around, to align globally, you must find common issues, common goals, and have those relationships built so that you are able to get through the product roadmap and the interlock and the approval sessions that are required. You're only going to do that with the support of people around you. And if you're aligning on a common goal, as opposed to everybody going after something very individual. And add that into the part around honesty with your stakeholders. And I think you're well on your way to successfully aligning globally. So final point, and I just wanted to run through sources that I massively recommend. So there are some books that I recommend. There are chapters dedicated towards remote product management, working collaboratively in all three of these. Generally in terms of becoming a product manager, loads of advice and guidance. So we're looking at Inspired, How to Create Tech Products Customers Love by Marty Kagan, is my #1 book. Sprint, How to Solve Big Problems and Test New Ideas in 5 Days by Jake Knapp and the guys at Google Ventures. Amazing book in terms of creating design sprints, the whole concept around bringing people from business, engineering, and product together at the front of a problem to thrash out ideas, design, prototyping, and having users validate them. It goes into huge detail in how to achieve that. Super useful. And the Product Manager's Survival Guide, 2nd edition. This was actually one of the first books I read on product management. And again, there's some great stuff in there around hints and tips around succeeding remotely and working in huge organizations, as well as some startups as well. There's some great stuff in there. I've also selected 3 videos that are from Product School. So other senior PMs and alike who have done these similar sessions on Product School. So there's one there by Idan Fargian from Alibaba Group around delivering different products for different cultures. I thought that would be super relevant to and linked to the session we've had. Julian Lung from Airbnb as well, around lessons of product localization. I think that would be super useful and linked to today's session. And obviously I've sort of really banged the drum today about building great relationships. And I think that would be another great video linked to this one as well. So with that, it's really just down to me to say thanks so much for logging in, listening to me. If you have any questions, or if you feel that I would be able to help you or coach you or anything that you want to ask me, you can catch me on LinkedIn. Sorry about the slightly long tag handle. And there's also my email address as well. I'm super open to anybody approaching. So yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate you listening to me, and yeah, have great success building great products.